Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we turn our attention to a story that has captured headlines across the nation. President Donald Trump, a figure who has dominated American politics for over a decade, is showing signs of significant vulnerability as the latest polls reveal troubling trends ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. In recent weeks, surveys from multiple reputable sources have painted a consistent picture. President Trump's approval ratings have slipped, signaling potential challenges not only for him personally, but also for the Republican Party as it prepares to defend key seats in Congress. While the story is complex, the numbers tell a clear message. The president's support, once rock solid in the wake of his election victories, is now facing significant erosion. The numbers, understanding the decline. As of early February 2026, multiple polls indicate that Trump's job approval has fallen to the low to mid-40s, with some surveys dipping even further. This represents a sharp contrast to his post-election highs and marks one of the lowest points in his second term. For instance, the Pew Research Center conducted a poll from January 20th to January 26, 2026, revealing that only 37% of Americans approve of the president's performance, down from 40% in fall 2025. Even more striking, just 27% of Americans now express support for all or most of his policies and plans, a significant drop from the previous 35%. This decline is driven largely by shifts within his own party, where confidence in Trump's leadership and direction has shown notable erosion. Half of all respondents in this survey expressed the view that his administration's actions have been worse than expected. Aggregated polling averages, such as those tracked by Real Clear Politics, Nate Silver's Silver Bulletin, and Ballotpedia, reinforce this trend. Approval ratings hover around 42 to 43%, while disapproval ranges from 54–55%, leaving a negative net approval of roughly 12 to 14 points. Some trackers indicate that strong disapproval has reached highs of 45 to 46%, a signal that dissatisfaction is not confined to a small segment, but is spreading more broadly across the electorate. Even Fox News, a network traditionally considered favorable to the president, shows sobering data. Their late January 2026 survey found 44% approval, unchanged from December, yet 54% of respondents believe the country is worse off than a year ago. Perhaps most telling, many voters, including some Republicans, feel that the president is not focusing enough on the economy, which remains a central concern for millions of Americans. Other prominent surveys, including economist YouGov, Reuters Ipsos, and NYT Siena, report a range of approval ratings from the low 30s to mid-40s. Disapproval, meanwhile, often sits in the mid-50s or higher. Notably, the handling of immigration appears to have become a particularly contentious issue, with approval on this front dropping to 38–39% in some polls, despite immigration being a core concern for many of his supporters. What is driving the decline? Numbers alone don't tell the full story. Behind these polls are trends and events that help explain why public support has shifted. Analysts point to several key factors. Persistent economic concerns. Rising prices and ongoing inflation remain among the top voter priorities. Many Americans feel that the president's policies have not helped, and in some cases may have worsened, personal financial challenges. There is widespread frustration that the administration seems focused on issues like immigration, foreign policy distractions, or headline-grabbing topics, rather than the day-to-day concerns of affordability and economic security. Immigration backlash. Recent incidents involving enforcement actions, such as ICE operations in Minneapolis, have contributed to lower approval on immigration policy. Even some Republicans who previously supported Trump expressed discomfort with the handling of this issue, further eroding base support. Eroding base confidence within his own party, confidence in the president's mental fitness, ethical conduct, and respect for democratic norms has shown measurable decline. Pew Research reports that Republican support for Trump's overall agenda has fallen from 67% to 56%, reflecting growing unease among voters who had previously been staunch allies. Broader national mood. Many Americans increasingly perceive the country as being worse off than it was a year ago. Historical midterm trends compound this concern, as the president's party often loses seats in Congress during midterm elections, putting Republican majorities at risk. These factors, when combined, suggest that Trump and the Republican Party may face more formidable challenges than initially expected as November 2026 approaches. The midterm implications. Political analysts are watching these trends closely because they carry direct consequences for the upcoming midterm elections. Generic ballot tests have shown Democrats either ahead or competitive in key House races, indicating that declining presidential support may translate into broader electoral setbacks for Republicans. President Trump has acknowledged these challenges publicly, noting the historical patterns in which the sitting president's party tends to struggle during midterms. While he remains a polarizing figure with deeply loyal supporters, the cumulative effect of declining approval ratings, economic frustrations, and policy controversies presents a scenario that cannot be ignored. It is essential to understand that polls are snapshots of public opinion at a given moment. Numbers can shift, sometimes rapidly, in response to economic developments, legislative achievements, or controversies. Yet the current framing across major media outlets paints a picture of a president facing mounting headwinds, what some are describing as the first signs of a big loss in public support since his last electoral victory. As we examine President Trump's current standing, it's crucial to understand the larger context. History often provides the clearest lens through which we can interpret the significance of these polls and trends. While numbers fluctuate from week to week, patterns emerge when we look at past presidencies, particularly in the critical months leading up to midterm elections, presidential approval, and midterm history. It is a well-established pattern in American politics. Presidents often experience declines in popularity as they enter their second term, and their parties frequently face setbacks in midterm elections. Consider the experiences of recent presidents. George W. Bush, 2006 midterms. Despite high approval after 9/11, his second term saw a decline in public support due to the prolonged Iraq War and domestic policy controversies. Republicans lost control of both the House and Senate. Barack Obama, 2010 midterms. Following the passage of the Affordable Care Act, economic frustrations, and opposition mobilization, Democrats lost 63 House seats, highlighting how midterms can punish the sitting president's party, even when approval is moderate. Donald Trump, 2018 midterms. In his first term, Trump's party lost 40 House seats despite strong support among core voters, demonstrating that presidential approval alone does not insulate a party from electoral losses. In this historical light, the recent dip in Trump's approval, hovering in the low 40s, raises red flags for Republicans heading into November 2026. Even modest shifts in public sentiment can have outsized effects in competitive districts, especially when turnout patterns favor the opposition party. Public sentiment, the human side of polling. While numbers tell one part of the story, the human dimension reveals deeper concerns and emotions driving these shifts. Many Americans report frustration over rising living costs, a sense of political stagnation, and unease with the direction of national priorities. These sentiments cut across party lines in ways that polls reflect but cannot fully capture. For instance, Republicans who supported Trump in previous elections now express worry about his focus. While core issues such as immigration and national security remain important, surveys show voters increasingly believe that economic concerns, affordability, employment stability, and inflation have not been addressed to their satisfaction. This disconnect between leadership priorities and voter concerns underscores the broader challenge facing any incumbent administration. Democrats, meanwhile, view this opportunity strategically. Generic ballot tests suggest that even districts previously considered safe for Republicans could become competitive. Political strategists highlight that midterm elections are rarely determined solely by party loyalty. Instead, local sentiment, turnout enthusiasm, and national perception of the president's effectiveness often dictate outcomes. Key issues influencing public opinion. Several specific factors appear to be driving voter sentiment at this time. Economic pressure. Despite efforts to stimulate growth or reduce inflation, many Americans feel that their personal finances are under strain. Rising prices for housing, healthcare, and essential goods weigh heavily on families, and these concerns remain at the forefront of political decision-making. Immigration and policy enforcement. Immigration continues to be a polarizing issue. High-profile enforcement actions have sparked criticism even among the president's base, illustrating the delicate balance leaders must strike between policy enforcement and public perception. Leadership confidence. Confidence in the president's mental fitness, judgment, and adherence to democratic norms has shown signs of erosion. Even loyal Republicans report hesitation when asked about the president's ability to lead effectively on both domestic and international fronts. Media influence and public discourse. In today's hyper-connected media environment, perceptions shift rapidly. Headlines highlighting declines in approval, controversy over policy decisions, or debate over priorities contribute to a broader narrative that affects voter behavior. Implications for the Republican Party. The stakes for the Republican Party are clear. With several critical House and Senate seats up for grabs in November 2026, declining presidential approval could translate into tangible losses. Historically, the midterms have been challenging for the president's party, but the current mix of economic frustration, immigration concerns, and perceived leadership gaps compounds the difficulty. Republican strategists are acutely aware of this dynamic. Efforts to shore up support may focus on emphasizing local achievements, connecting directly with voters' economic concerns, and carefully framing national priorities to resonate with a broader constituency. The challenge lies in balancing loyalty to the president with the need to address the growing concerns of independent and moderate voters. Trump's acknowledgement and response. President Trump himself has acknowledged potential difficulties ahead. Drawing on historical patterns, he has highlighted the tendency for the president's party to struggle during midterms. However, he remains a polarizing figure whose deep base support could still provide a buffer against broader losses. The question, however, is whether that base is sufficient to offset growing dissatisfaction in other segments of the electorate. In public appearances and statements, the president has sought to focus on achievements and policy successes, particularly in areas like national security and foreign policy. Yet, as the polls indicate, for many voters, the immediacy of economic concerns and local issues carries more weight than headlines about international affairs. As we look toward the remainder of 2026, the question on everyone's mind is clear. What does this shift in public opinion mean for President Trump, the Republican Party, and the broader political landscape? The numbers we've seen in recent polls are more than just percentages. They are signals of voter sentiment, reflecting concerns, priorities, and expectations. Understanding these trends can help us anticipate what the months ahead may bring. Scenario 1: stabilization and recovery. One possible path for the president is stabilization. Historically, approval ratings can rebound if voters perceive decisive action or tangible successes. For example, economic improvements, bipartisan legislative wins, or effective responses to emerging crises could help restore confidence. In this scenario, Trump and his team would need to pivot effectively to focus on the issues most pressing to everyday Americans: inflation, job security, and cost of living. By demonstrating a direct connection between policy actions and measurable improvements in people's lives, approval could stabilize in the mid to high 40s, mitigating the risk of significant midterm losses. A stabilization scenario also relies on strong communication. In an era dominated by social media and 24-hour news cycles, crafting a narrative that resonates with voters is as important as the policies themselves. By addressing concerns directly, acknowledging challenges honestly, and offering concrete solutions, the administration could regain some of the trust that recent polls suggest has eroded. Scenario 2: continued decline. Alternatively, approval ratings could continue their downward trajectory, particularly if voters perceive a disconnect between leadership priorities and their personal experiences. Economic pressures, controversial policy decisions, or perceived inattention to domestic concerns could exacerbate dissatisfaction. If this scenario unfolds, Republicans face the real possibility of losing key House and Senate seats, potentially shifting the balance of power in Congress. A continuation of current trends would also amplify media scrutiny, reinforcing the narrative of a president and party struggling to maintain support. Political analysts warn that even modest changes in voter sentiment can have amplified consequences in tightly contested districts. In such cases, local elections become referendums not just on candidates, but on national leadership, turning midterms into a critical test of public confidence. Scenario 3: polarization and base mobilization. A third scenario involves continued polarization, where Trump's core base remains intensely loyal, offsetting losses among moderate and independent voters. In this case, the president's approval may stay relatively low overall, but high turnout among staunch supporters could help Republicans retain crucial seats. This scenario, however, comes with risks. Polarization can intensify political tensions, reduce opportunities for bipartisan cooperation, and create an environment where small missteps or controversies have outsized consequences. Moreover, over-reliance on base mobilization may not be sufficient in swing districts, where broader voter dissatisfaction could outweigh party loyalty. Public perception and media framing. It is also essential to consider the role of public perception and media framing. Headlines describing a big loss in approval, coverage of contentious policy decisions, and debates over priorities all shape the narrative. For many Americans, these stories influence how they view leadership effectiveness and national direction, even if they do not follow the details of every policy. As we have seen in previous cycles, perception often carries as much weight as reality. Leaders who can effectively manage public narratives, respond to criticisms, and highlight successes may weather periods of low approval more effectively than those who do not. Implications for voters and democracy beyond the numbers and political strategy. These trends have broader implications for American democracy. Midterm elections are a critical mechanism for accountability, allowing citizens to express approval or dissatisfaction with the direction of the country. Declining presidential approval, therefore, is not merely a political headline. It represents the voice of the electorate signaling concerns, priorities, and expectations for leadership. For voters, understanding these dynamics is key. Decisions at the ballot box are shaped not only by partisanship, but by perceptions of how effectively elected officials are addressing the issues that matter most in everyday life: economic stability, security, and the opportunity for a better future. Closing thoughts. As the 2026 midterm elections approach, the unfolding story of President Trump's approval rating serves as a window into the broader national mood. Numbers, polls, and surveys provide insight, but the human dimension, concern, frustration, hope, gives this story its depth and urgency. From low to mid-40s approval ratings to growing discontent among previously loyal supporters, the trajectory is clear. Challenges lie ahead. Whether through stabilization, continued decline, or polarization-driven resilience, the coming months will test leadership, strategy, and the pulse of the American people. For the Republican Party, the stakes could not be higher. Each district, each campaign, and each message will be shaped by these broader trends. For voters, this is an opportunity to engage, to evaluate, and to influence the direction of the country through their voice and their vote. Ultimately, what these polls reveal is more than just numbers. They reveal a story of accountability, expectation, and the ever-present power of public opinion. As we continue to watch this story unfold, one thing is certain: the 2026 midterms will be a defining moment, not only for President Trump and his party, but for the future of American governance itself.